Welcome everyone to this virtual live event introducing the Marketplace 50. I'm your announcer, Tom Gatos, CMO of McFadyen Digital. This session is scheduled for a 50-minute total runtime, including a Q&A period at the end. Please enter any questions into the Q&A box and we'll do our best to get to as many as possible. The recording of this session and the deck will be provided to all registrants after the webinar. I'll now turn it over to your host, Tom McFadyen.
Thank you, Tom. I'm Tom McFadyen, CEO of McFadyen Digital, and I'm honored to be discussing the Marketplace 50 today with a panel of marketplace thought leaders. Our panel today includes, again, 4 of the people identified on the Marketplace 50. I'm honored to be one of them myself. We've got Mark Brohan, who's the VP of B2B Research at Digital Commerce 360, Marina Planas, the CEO and co-founder of TheNTWK, and Rick Watson, founder and CEO of RMW Commerce Consulting. I'll let each of them introduce their companies, and then we'll get into the Marketplace 50. Mark, I'll hand it over to you.
Oh, just very quickly. I mean, we've been, I go back to the very beginning of e-commerce back in 1998 when we launched Internet Retailer. I spent 15 years researching 6,000 online retailers. And so that's what we do. We're a bunch of curious journalists that love to write about and research and analyze e-commerce. So we've been at it for a while. I've been at it for a very long while, and I still enjoy it. So we hope you kind of read us and we just want to serve the market.
Thanks, Mark. You've got great content, and we'll be seeing some of your insights on Marketplace. Now I'll hand it over to Rick to talk about RMW Commerce Consulting.
Thanks a lot, Tom. My name is Rick Watson. I'm a technologist who's been in the e-commerce industry for over 20 years, starting with Channel Advisor, companies like Barnes & Noble, Pitney Bowes, and Merchant Tree. About 4 years ago, I made the jump to the consulting side, and I work primarily with a lot of venture and private equity-backed brands and retailers that are looking to digitally transform and grow their commerce channels, whether through marketplaces or direct-to-consumer.
Thanks, Rick. It's an honor to have you on our webinar today. I always follow you. You've got great content on LinkedIn and other sources. A great thought leader, much like Marina. Please, can you share some news about the network?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Tom, for having me. The network is a place where innovative business model, knowledge, and experience are created and exchanged to build sustainable and successful companies. How we do that? We do it through a community experience. And what we are doing is training, webinars, live podcasts, and our summit in Barcelona.
That's a great event. Enjoyed going there last year. You've got some great thought leadership and engagement enablement around the marketplace and platform economy business model.
Thanks.
So thanks for joining us. One slide about McFadyen Digital. We've been in the digital enablement business for over a third of a century, building e-commerce for over a quarter century, and building and advising on marketplaces for 15 years. We've got a team of over 250 marketplace professionals across the globe, and we've helped enable over 10% of the Fortune 500, approaching 15%. And we've built hundreds of e-commerce and marketplace solutions, some of which generate over $1 billion a year of annual GMV. And we help clients along the marketplace journey, from strategy, planning, budgeting, funding, to tech stack selection, to building, implementation, and launching marketplaces. Some of the business process outsourcing as well for seller recruiting and onboarding, launching, marketing, and ongoing marketplace performance management. And one last thing, we published a bestseller book, Marketplace Best Practices, which has been a number one bestseller on Amazon for 2 years in some categories of commerce and shopping. We'll be making a copy of that free during the Shop Talk conference for any of you that are attending that. Got lots of other free resources available on McFadyen.com. Now into the meat of what we want to talk about today, marketplaces. So this is where I'll hand it over to Mark Brohan and the insights that Digital Commerce 360 has been finding from their research on marketplaces.
Okay, well, thanks, Tom. I appreciate that. And there's a lot of ground to cover, but this is my first slide looking at the state of B2B marketplaces. And the takeaway here is very simple. You ain't seen nothing yet, because the only thing that marketplace has in common, B2B is B2C, is just the general term. And the concept that buyers are linked to sellers by a centrally connected platform. So that the definition is simple, but how the two models are so different is striking. And so B2B marketplaces are now becoming mainstream. They are going to become a greater and bigger part of the digital sales channel for B2B companies of all sizes going forward. But it's new, it's the Wild West. And the takeaway here is that in a period of no less than 3 years, if you look at the sales, which are okay, but that's not the takeaway. The takeaway here is that the share of marketplace or of market share that marketplaces took away from others in a short period of time is the fastest I've seen in 25 years of doing e-commerce research. More to come. So a lot going on. Amazon business accounts for 1 in every 4 transactions. But you know what? Walmart just knocked on the door. And that has a lot of mid-sized distribution companies clearly worried about that. But you know what? 2 years ago, 5 years ago, my colleague Paul and I counted maybe 75 marketplaces. Today, it's 500 and growing. So the takeaway here is that younger digital omni-channel buyers at their organizations, they want technology to make their job simpler. And they, in fact, are turning to marketplaces at a rate that folks like me never did. So all of this is the momentum driving the growth forward. So as I said, we ain't seen nothing yet. And I'll come back from time to time over the course of webinars like this to kind of keep you posted. But let's take a look at B2C. That's where the real story is. This is mainstream. It continues to be mainstream. And the reason for that is simple. Consumers know they want to compare multiple buyers, multiple sellers. They know where to go and where to look. That in itself is not new. The takeaways here are kind of threefold. Number one, the growth continues. Well, as e-commerce had a bit of a bumpy year because of the economy and a few other things, marketplaces did not. And so marketplaces are growing. The bigger are accounting for more of it, but there's still a lot of room to play on the B2C side. And you're seeing all kinds of things happen, if you will. Just yesterday, you may have seen where Amazon Garage opened an OEM site, for auto parts. If you don't think that has some of the auto parts guys shaken and worried about things, keep it coming. But keep in mind here, consumers have been around these channels for 20 years. They know what they want. They expect to get it. And so the model here is mature and tweaking, but it's the best user experience that's going to win at the end of the day. And keep in mind, we live in a global village. I'm showing you some US slides here, but keep in mind, the world is basically one connected marketplace. Case in point, China. Most of what passes for online retail in China is indeed a marketplace. So with that, more to come. But Tom, let's cover our thumbnail version of what we're seeing on our side of the ball here. Just more market share to kind of show you how big this stuff is getting.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Let's jump into what the Marketplace 50 is. It's an exclusive list of the most important people in 5 different categories of marketplace and multi-vendor commerce. There are really some fundamentals in this. It's network-based. It's a platform business model. There's a nexus of rules that enable marketplaces. There's some that started it, some that thought about it, some that enable it. So let's jump into the 5 categories into which we separated these 50 influencers and important people. We start with the Hall of Fame. These are people that, real pioneers, have been in the industry 10, 20 plus years and really defined the marketplace concept. Some of the people will probably be in this space forever known as the marketplace pioneers. Some of the thought leaders, for example, helped codify the underlying fundamentals of the business. It's a nexus of rules, it's a network effect, it's a terms and conditions, it's a buyers and sellers, multi-sided economics. So there are people who help codify what makes a marketplace and help distribute that concept to the industry. We also have the market makers. A lot of these are the financial institutions that invested in organizations to either build a marketplace, to build a platform for marketplace, or to organize a conference, which helps organizations become marketplaces. And then there are platforms and technologies which make it easier to launch a marketplace. And these could be a marketplace platform, a tax platform, a payment platform, et cetera. And then finally, the one we're going to announce today is the actual operators, those companies that run marketplaces, a lot of times on the shoulders of the 4 different groups that came before them that helped enable some of those marketplaces. So let's jump right in. The first one is a Hall of Fame. So we've got 10 people here. Obviously some well-known people, from Jeff Bezos to Jack Ma from Alibaba. I'll let some of our panelists here chime in with some of their insights and thoughts on some of these Hall of Fame marketplace pioneers.
Yeah, Tom, I have one here. My former boss, Scott Wingo, CEO of Channel Advisor, one of the ultimate pioneers in the space. When he founded the company that would later become Channel Advisor in '99, a marketplace was not a place to run a business if you were a major company. And I think as a software provider, that's really one of the things that Channel Advisor brought to the model, was to prove that a major brand could build a large business selling through marketplaces like Amazon and eBay. And so it's a pleasure to see him on this list.
That's great. That's great. And they really defined the vendor aggregation network concept and enablement of marketplaces. Marina, any thoughts from you?
Yes, I would like to highlight the work of Jeff Bezos. So it's a clear example of beginning from an e-commerce, becoming marketplace, and then transforming the full company as an ecosystem, right? With Amazon Web Services and so on. And also I would like to highlight the work that Adrian from Miracle, they are doing, right? So giving the technology, providing technology for companies, traditional companies. So they allow that every business to launch and operate its own winning marketplace at a scale.
Yeah, that's great. We love working with them. They're the first platform to platform your business in the platform economy. Great points. Mark, any thoughts you'd like to highlight? Any people you'd like to highlight?
And there's someone missing here. I'm going to tell you who it is. And that's Tom McFadyen. And I have known Tom for 20 years, and nobody over 20 years has been as passionate, as knowledgeable, as open and sharing and trying to scale one of the most important digital channels that we have from literally day one. So this industry is lucky to have Tom doing what he does. So Tom belongs on this list, and I threw that in. Now, Marcos from Mercado Libre and Mark Lohr, I can sum up both in one term: market disruptor. Mercado Libre set the standard for how a single nation marketplace focused primarily on Mexico in the very beginning has now transcended into a marketplace that is the de facto online retail establishment for South America, one of the most decentralized continents that we have. But you know, Marcos knows international. Not many people do outside of China. True pioneer here. Mark Lohr, I could speak for days about Mark Lohr. I go back to covering Mark Lohr when he was the founder of diapers.com, and first year sales of 15 million. And what he did back then was he figured out a way to sell diapers online, make a profit, and he did so when all the chains took a pass at it. And he pioneered how to build a community. And then as he went from jet.com to Walmart, he was one of the early pioneers of showing chain retailers how to build a sustainable marketplace that could actually take on and challenge Amazon business. So this market disruptor describes those folks in stages, and frankly, Tom McFadyen too.
Mark, you know, he's amazing how he grew unicorn jet.com from 0 to $3 billion acquisition price in a couple of years. Amazing the power of marketplaces. I'd actually like to highlight Apurva and the Instacart. Most marketplaces are two-sided. You have buyers and sellers. But with Instacart, he really pioneered a four-sided marketplace where you not only have the consumers buying groceries, you have the grocery stores as the sellers. You have a third party, which is the gig economy delivery staff and the personal shoppers. And you have the fourth side of that marketplace, which is the CPG brands that are buying advertising and selling goods and buying data from Instacart. So really have the dynamics of a four-sided marketplace, which builds an even more defensible moat around a business. And with that, Instacart grew from nothing to a $40 billion valuation in 10 years, more valuable than any of the grocery stores, which have been around for a century or more. So again, another great example of the leverage of the marketplace business model. Let's go on to our second category, some of the marketplace thought leaders. Actually, I'd like to highlight somebody on here, Mark Brohan, returning the favor here as we pat ourselves on the back. As Mark said, I've known him for a couple decades, and he really pioneered some of this thought leadership around from the early days of the Internet Retailer 500, became the Internet Retailer 1000, the 2000, and now the Marketplace 300. So he's really been tracking all kinds of metrics about online retailers, from average order value, SKU count, conversion rates, the technology stack that everybody's using, great insights and data for 20 plus years that Mark has pioneered around e-commerce and marketplaces. Maybe I'll hand it over to Rick. Any insights you want to share here on some of these thought leaders?
Yeah, what I want to call out is Joe, who's the editor-in-chief at Marketplace Pulse. I could tell you, I have no idea where Joe gets some of his research, but I trust it implicitly. And he is one of the few people that puts out original content on Amazon and other marketplaces faster than anyone else I know. So he's a source I really trust a lot and follow.
Yeah, definitely. I read everything he posts. It's great insights. Marina, any thoughts from you?
Yes, I would like to highlight our networkers. I would like to highlight Twitter events, right? So I like from him that the risk that exploring new technologies and projects and explaining like that, so he can be advising platform strategy in traditional companies, but also creating new companies like My Learning NFTs, right? So he can be the co-chair of the MIT Strategy Summit, but also our co-chair, the Network Summit. So I like how he's explaining everything. He's the complex topics, just using the best use cases. And for me, very important, he's shaking Europe with the 16 challenge to us. So I like to highlight him.
Great. Thanks. Mark, how about yourself?
There's just quite a few people here to talk about, but I'm going to talk about Jeffrey Parker and Marshall here, because 7 years ago, they wrote the definitive book on platform networking and how it scaled and how it became anything from Airbnb to everything else. So when you see a model, it needs to be put in perspective. It needs to have a proper scope taken to it. So the book is still relevant today as it was 7 years ago. So yes, these people are indeed thought leaders, still are.
Absolutely. Yeah, they set the groundwork for everything else that came later in codifying what a marketplace is. In fact, we dedicated our first chapter to their book, kind of summarizing what they identified and documented, and also the pioneers of the marketplace, the MIT IDE Platform Strategy Summit with Peter Evans.
Yeah,
I'd also like to highlight Rick. He's been in the marketplace space for 20 years. One of the, I guess, first 5 employees at Channel Advisor. I think you worked on the Barnes & Noble 3P marketplace as well. And you do a lot of consulting for half a decade on marketplace strategy, I guess. Anything else you want to add?
That's right. No, that's great. I mean, I think most of my career I spent in one way or another in marketplace businesses. So it's definitely a passion of mine. So happy to continue that here.
Great. Well, again, thanks for joining us today. So the third category, the marketplace market makers. These are some of the organizations that help fund, provide platforms or conferences in which people can learn more about the marketplace industry and again, get funding for this. Marina, you want to highlight some of these folks?
Yes, sure. I think that I would like to highlight James Courier. For me, is one of my source of knowledge. So what can I say about the creator, the network effects Bible, right? So all marketplaces, we have a network effect. So a person that give a key tactical advice to startups, always sharing his knowledge. So I really to highlight his wonderful work.
Great. And I'd like to highlight you, Marina, with the network. A similarly named organization, the Network Effects or NFX, and the network, the TheNTWK, a great organization that you started or co-founded and operate in Europe, bringing a lot of the platform economy best practices. I was honored to speak at your conference last year and look forward to contributing to the organization going forward. Thanks for everything you do to bring this platform education and network effects to Europe and the rest of the world.
Thank you to you.
Mark, I mean, anybody you'd like to highlight here?
Yeah, Mike Brown. I've had the pleasure of knowing Mike for a few years now, and yeah, of course, he's venture capital and he's a very savvy business person, but more important than that, it takes a few people to advance the industry in different ways, and Mike is one of the most open, nice people that I think you're ever going to meet. And the thing is, what Mike is doing with Bowery is he is looking into the spaces where marketplaces are becoming just uh, key chunks of the market. Logistics and freight, just to name one. And so not only is Mike tracking and funding early stage companies, much more important, Mike is kind of helping to build the economic model for investment and reinvestment that's going to be the gold standard for how companies going forward are going to do it. So when you think of a marketplace maker and a thought leader, and he's kind of groundbreaking what they do specifically, that's Mike and Bowery in spades.
Yeah, definitely. And I enjoyed when he spoke at one of your recent conferences.
Yeah.
You ran at DC 360. Rick, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the titans in this list that stands out to me is Mark Andreessen. He did just a few things in the space, such as, created the Mosaic and Netscape browsers, which were the foundation of everything we're doing online here. And after then, invested in a ton of marketplace businesses, has sat on the board of Facebook and eBay and other classic marketplaces that over the years as well.
Yeah, definitely a pioneer and thought leader and market maker. I'll highlight one more person before we move on. Jeremy Gottschalk. He runs the Marketplace Risk Conference, which is kind of interesting. Most of the conferences you'll hear about how wonderful marketplaces are and the benefits of platform businesses. His conference talks about the risks of it and what can go wrong. So it tends to be attended by a lot of lawyers and risk management, insurance companies who talk about what can happen with anti-money laundering and know your customer, KYC, and other liabilities that can happen with marketplaces. So Jeremy runs this great event out in California and in the UK called Marketplace Risk. If you're interested in some of the legal aspects and some of the concerns that you have to look into, Marketplace Risk is a great event. McFadyen Digital will be out there this spring. So next, let's talk about marketplace enablers. So Marina, would you like to take us through some of your thoughts on marketplace enablers?
Yes, of course. And you are the one that Mark has spoiled already before I'm talking about you. So I just wanted to add the words
Sorry.
Mark. I just want to add you great knowledge and huge knowledge that you are continuously sharing with all of us. And do you know anyone that travel and contributes more to any exhibitions, conference, and summit around the world? I think you are the one that are doing everything. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thank you. You're making me blush. Rick, how about you?
Yeah, I think one part of marketplaces that a lot of people forget about is payments, and particularly as marketplaces started to catch fire kind of in the early 2010, 2011 timeframe, it was very hard for a retailer to get a payment provider for a marketplace because no one would take risk on all these small sellers. And Stripe really made a name for themselves in the space by actually enabling they became the default choice for a marketplace because they were the only person that would underwrite lots of small sellers for the risk point of view that you mentioned the conference earlier. And so wanted to really highlight, and I think it shows their investments that they're now the payment system underlying Amazon and Shopify both.
Yeah, great technology. Mark, how about you? I think you're on mute.
I'm sorry, my bad. And Mariana, we'll praise Tom 3 slides in together. How would that be? So if I did not mean to steal any of your thunder, but if I did, I apologize. Oliver is not just a consultant. Oliver knows his way around very obtuse, very down to earth back end things that make marketplaces happen, like procurement, supply chain, ERP. and all the complexities that go with running and successfully making a B2B network marketplace work. So there are a few people that are as knowledgeable and frankly sharing industry data and insight on this kind of obtuse topic that's so important yet misunderstood. Oliver brings some clear light of day onto that. So that's why he's here.
Yeah, he's a great guy. And great organization at Deloitte as well. And I'll add to the payments, the tax side of things. So Scott McFarlane of Avalara, the considerations for tax nexus, which have a much more complicated requirement than traditional first-party e-commerce. So again, the nexus is really based on where the seller is and where the buyer is, not necessarily where the marketplace operator or the e-commerce operator is. So Avalara has helped solve that problem for a lot of marketplace operators and make it much easier to launch a marketplace. So let's move on to our next unveiling, the big unveiling. So the fifth category, the Marketplace Operator Excellence. So we have 10 new nominees, which we just announced today in terms of marketplace operators. Rick, do you want to take us through your thoughts on some of these?
Yeah, I think a relatively new person to the list, but not a stranger to marketplace businesses from his history, is Matt Baer, the Chief Customer and Digital Officer at Macy's. He has recently really transformed, I would say, two major platforms that have led to some of Macy's recent growth, both their dropship program as well as their newer marketplace initiative. And now I would say relative to a lot of general merchandise retailers and apparel centric that are coming out of the pandemic, Macy's has been a standout in the last year and being able to weather the storm through some smart inventory decisions.
Definitely. It's great transformation of a giant legacy retailer. Marina, any thoughts from you?
Yes, I would like to choose Brian Chesky because I would like to announce that all his leadership and he's now, you know, that he's living on Airbnb houses now and he's hosting his own house, right? So I think all of us, we use in order to explain what is a marketplace, the Airbnb use case and how they are deploying around all countries. So I love Brian Chesky.
And it's great to have some of these other marketplaces for services. Most people think of marketplaces for physical goods, like an Amazon or Walmart, where you're buying a physical good, but a lot of these are marketplaces for services. Airbnb is lodging services, Upwork is professional services. We have different types of services that are very popular out there, like Uber, for example. Let's go on to some thoughts from Mark.
I'm going to talk about Tyler Ellison for just a sec. You've got to come from an industry long-term to truly understand the industry. And Tyler has done that in spades, of course, with his long background in ChemDirect. But yeah, my point is, I mentioned earlier on that the complexities of B2B marketplaces they vary so widely from market to market, but Tyler not only is building ChemDirect with his team into, their part of the chemicals industry. One of the things that Tyler is doing in excellence is he's learning to kind of build out the entire user experience in a way that basically makes them far more than just buyer meets seller in a marketplace. What they're doing is they're becoming kind of the de facto logistics company too for their industry. They're doing a partnership with Snyder, a $5.6 billion trucking company, to basically go after the logistics side of the chem industry and all that goes with that. That takes not linear thinking, that takes global thinking, and that's what Tyler is here for, because he's doing that. You're going to hear great things from ChemDirect in the years to come.
Yeah, they're great disruptor of the chemical industry, and McFadyen Digital is honored to work with them. I'd like to highlight two, actually. So Niraj Shah from Wayfair, they really helped fight the battle. Unfortunately, it was a losing battle for the sales tax. So in 2018, South Dakota versus Wayfair was a pivotal court ruling about whether the tax nexus of marketplaces. I mentioned that the tax now depends on where the seller is and the certain thresholds of de minimis versus taxable shipment to the customer. So it was a big battle, which really transformed tax. Again, adding tax to the marketplaces, which made it a little bit more complex. But it was a pivotal transformation in the marketplace industry. And second is Terry at Best Buy Canada. So Best Buy Canada was a $4 billion retailer with only first party goods. About 5 years ago, they launched a miracle marketplace. And to hear Terry say this in his words, it was, he'll say something, quote, I may get this wrong a little bit, but he says, Best Buy was a company that tried out a marketplace on the side, and we evolved to become a marketplace in which we are just one of the sellers. And in fact, now in their marketplace, I don't remember the most recent stat, but 80 or 90% of the SKUs that you'll find in search results are third-party products and not Best Buy products. And with that, they've grown huge. That's the most profitable, most fastest growing in margin and in revenue part of their business. And they've expanded to become the leader in a lot of different categories you wouldn't expect in Canada. So they're the number one seller of camping goods. They're the number one seller of baby products, which again, you'd never really expect an electronics store to get into those categories, but with the marketplace, they expanded and started dominating those different verticals with the marketplace business model. Great example of how a traditional retailer can transform into a marketplace business operator. So that was our 5 categories. Why don't we open it up for some Q&A with the audience here on our panel here. I think we had close to 300 registrants for our event today. So we'll open it up for any Q&A questions that might come in. I have a couple that will get things kickstarted with here. But actually, before I do, feel free to get more information with engage.mcfadyen.com/M50, or on LinkedIn. You can look at the Marketplace 50 has a page, and you can follow some of the updates that we'll be providing on these Marketplace 50 folks. So maybe you'll transition over to some of the questions. I have one I'll kick off with. Mark, you mentioned earlier that e-commerce had its first ever decline, yet marketplaces have continued to grow at a very fast rate. Why do you, and I'll ask the others after you, Mark, why do you think that is? I think you're on mute, Mark. Mark, you're still on mute.
Don't you hate that? Don't
Yep.
you hate that?
We all hate that.
In a down economy, people go to where they think they're going to find the best deals, the best bargains, and frankly the best user experience. But rather than kind of going one-on-one, the reason that marketplaces continue to grow and take share in kind of maybe a lackluster year for B2C e-commerce is because of just that. Because it's many and not just the one, and that's a key ingredient when people get a little antsy about discretionary spending. They want to compare apples, the whole grove at once, not just one-on-one. And that's a secret that kind of goes back to 2009.
I think the many versus the one is an interesting point you make, Mark. If you think about when is it the hardest to make inventory decisions, it's in an up and down economy where inflation and consumers are changing what they want from month to month. And the fact is, within a marketplace, you have thousands of entrepreneurs making decisions about what they think are viable versus a centralized inventory planning function. And you just look at some of the big retailers, you could just sort of go down the line from, Target to Nordstrom's. All these inventories are having to write down huge amounts of inventory because you guess wrong, because you have to guess 6 months out for manufacturing. And a marketplace business doesn't necessarily have to deal with some of those same constraints, at least in the short term.
Definitely. Marina?
Well, basically, I agree with Rick. It's like when you are running nowadays, we have this problem of the cash flows, and also these problems that you don't have to have inventory. So the growth is going to be more and more, and is an easy way that we can apply. And I think that also, at least here in Europe, there is going to be more vertical marketplaces, right? So it's more going to be more not for all categories, but it's going to be more vertical for each segment and sector.
definitely. Coming up in some other topics, we'll talk more about the verticalization of marketplaces. But on this point about the e-commerce versus marketplace, I think also the supply chain resiliency and the multiple sourcing of goods was critical of critical importance during the pandemic when the supply chains were so disrupted. And having hundreds or thousands of sellers that can source your goods for you makes things much more nimble. Everybody knew, how hard it was to get masks during the start of the pandemic, but Etsy had thousands of people producing masks, or multiple sources of masks. That's just one example, of course, but that whole resiliency and the nimbleness of having hundreds of third-party sellers instead of depending upon in-house merchandisers, which get expensive and not so scalable as you try to add multiple new vendors and onboarding vendors, and that ERP load and contract negotiation process can be very multiple months for many of our clients. We've seen going from multiple months to up to 6 months to onboard new products from new vendors to a couple days in a marketplace business model. So next question here is comparing B2C and B2B and how buyer preferences and the younger generations affecting that. Anybody want to answer how they think that's affecting B2C versus B2B in the marketplace business model?
Well, it's a game changer. I mean, it's a game changer. And there was some key research just out from Forrester by Amy Hayes on this very point last week, which is not to say that, dinosaurs like me that are kind of winding up their career don't use marketplaces. But the thing is, frankly, procurement directors at organizations are millennial, Gen X, and basically they go to 10 channels, not just one. And down the line, they are more self-service, and what they truly want is they want to spend a lot more of their procurement available money on marketplaces. In some cases, 50% of what they're spending as an organization is going to run through a marketplace, because that is where they find, the mass they want, plus the user experience they want, and more importantly, the value add of logistics or pricing or product planning or ERP planning, all down the line. They want a one-stop shop with a lot of folks there. And because they want it, that's going to transcend B2B marketplace from just being a buyer seller into, frankly, these guys are going to give distribution companies a run for their money. Only they can be a lot bigger than a single source distribution company. They've got the entire industry. That's going to be a model to watch very closely. It's going to be younger buyer driven.
If I can go, it's I was corporate chemical purchasing worldwide for 4 years. So I think it's going to evolve in the sense that there is going to segment ABC purchasing in a company, right? So in one type of let's see, C products, we're going to go to Amazon or, standard ones. There are the B products that I think we are going to go to buy for the vertical ones. And for the A ones, important, I think we need to solve something here is the trust, right? So there are some kind of negotiations that we still to do, right? And how we are going to do it. And on the other side, millennials, I think they want just one click, right? So they want to buy and solve with one click, transparency, and let's see how we manage, right? This personal touch and confidence and relationship with provider, supplier, supplier and customer with this transparency and just one click operations.
Yeah, Mark, you mentioned the B2B and procurement, and I was running a software company that I acquired by a procurement software provider, and getting to see the challenge that organizations have buying from legacy punch-out catalogs with disconnected buying experiences, and then having to go through their corporate purchasing departments for different things. There's no one software platform for this until sort of Coupa started moving a lot of this to the cloud. Obviously, you had Ariba and those things, but the buying experience was very difficult. And so Amazon Business has really been eating the long tail of indirect procurement, office supplies, like all these thousands of small vendors just go under Amazon Business, and you can just go and buy there rather than having to integrate a single source supplier for pens, or just plug in Amazon, you get all the categories at once. And so they've been growing 30%, 20%, 15%, much faster than the traditional business to consumer marketplace is Amazon's business growth.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, Rick, you are so spot on with what you just said. But something else just to kind of maybe tag on for just kind of add on here is that if you think about the fact that younger digital first customers, they want a lot more transparency, and they're finding that on the marketplaces that they're not finding at the distribution companies. So what passes for e-commerce at a lot of distribution companies is, aha, I own these guys, I've done it for 3,000 years, and they're behind the firewall, so I control them. Maybe maybe it's going to last for a while, but the thing is, a lot of this is being changed. I mean, it's a change management driven by the marketplace. And what you just mentioned, Rick, is just spot on, because that is what's going to drive this stuff becoming even more mainstream.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think most people don't know how big Amazon's business marketplace is. I was just looking at stats. They're going to cross $40 billion in GMV this year. That's half of Walmart's e-commerce business last year. So it's a massive business that's flying under the radar.
Well, the thing is, it depends where you look at. I mean, for instance, if you look at where they've got huge market share in federal procurement, if you will, and also they've got, I think, 25 of the largest U.S. health systems, buying, for their hospital supply chain from Amazon Business. And you know what? What got them there? AWS. Amazon, they'll get you one way, but the thing is, they came in on the tail end of AWS. How did everybody else kind of think about a marketplace? And that's how they begin to kind of scale and get these big markets to get critical mass. Education is another prime example of that.
It's fascinating.
You're right.
Yeah, and I think you said 40 billion now, Rick, and I think was it Baird that forecast their revenue is going to be 80 billion by 2025 of Amazon business. So
yeah,
the growth rate of that is just huge. And once organizations see that, the old model of the salesman showing up at the counter with a box of donuts trying to get the business versus a much more highly efficient marketplace business model, who's going to win out in the long run there.
I'll still take a donut.
One last question here before we open to some of the ones on the panel. What piece of advice would you give to organizations considering their own marketplace, or what do you think is coming down the road? What's next with marketplaces? Rick,
yeah, I'll start out. I think one of the big things for a marketplace operator thinking about starting a marketplace is to start with it sounds simple, but it's fundamental. It's just to start with the customer problem, and that you need to make sure that the space you're in, there's a use case for marketplace that fundamentally solves a buyer problem. So we were talking about procurement for a second, like going from catalog to catalog, buying different categories of product. There's a huge use case for being a one-stop provider of all these supplies. And I think that's true in a lot of different categories. If you look at a retail category like toys, where, there are 10 suppliers that are 50% of the supply, and then there are thousands of suppliers that provide the other 50% of the supply. So a marketplace can provide a huge use case for a category like that. And I think as we get to these, as we see more businesses like ChemDirect and other vertical industrial, aerospace, chemical marketplaces, supply is diffuse. And that is a perfect application for a marketplace to aggregate that supply into one place, make it easier for the buyer. That can also enforce quality and reduce buyer stress at the same time.
Great. And this is kind of segueing on to Mario's question from the Q&A about what's the next best thing for marketplaces regarding tech. Mark, you want to tackle that, or the best advice for marketplace operators?
Well, two things. I mean, A, it's not rocket science, and Rick just covered the main thing, which is listen to your customers, solve a problem, and then B, make sure that what you do fits within the scope of what you do best and what you think is best for your organization, finally, you're going to fail, but fail fast, to kind of use a kind of a worn industry term. That's the best, maybe just some practical advice from a guy on the sidelines here. But kind of what's happening, it's already underway, which is what you're seeing is the evolution of a whole new way of buyers are going to do business with sellers digitally, because they want the best price, but more importantly, they want all the tools right there to make their job efficient and easy. That's everything from spec planning to logistics to finance and everything in between. So the value add is going to transform how buyers are going to interact with sellers. And it's not just the platform, it's how to manage a complex purchasing pattern all the way through and make it simple, efficient, direct, and transparent. That's the future of all this stuff. And see, it's here now. Pretty clear, actually.
Thanks, Mark.
For me, the advice is like solve a problem, think big and start small. So one category, and don't reinvent. So don't start coding, because there is no code tools. There is technology that you are the best ones to say that. Is like, do your product market fit, right? Use this code and these no code tools, and also get advisoring for knowledge people like you, right? So advisoring and not suffer the same mistakes that other people has done. So I will say that.
It's almost like there's a category of marketplace enablers and marketplace thought leaders that could help you with this.
Yes.
I'll add on to Mario's question about what's next big thing for marketplaces. I think retail media networks and the general advertising platforms. Amazon scaled their advertising business to I think 30 or 35 billion within 10 years, and it's continuing to growing. Actually, probably growing too much. It would be too much advertising on the Amazon website if you've seen some of the opinions about that. But I think for other organizations that have the critical mass, the opportunity to monetize the sellers and the buyers on your platform, especially in grocery, we've seen retail media networks popping up quite a bit. The ability to sell ads from the sellers to the buyers. And I mentioned earlier, Instacart was did a great job of monetizing the customer base that they have buying groceries with the CPG brands, where in fact, in some way, it minimizes the role of the grocery stores, as CPG brands are paying Instacart to advertise to end consumers and make their purchasing selections through Instacart instead of through the grocery store. So there's a huge power in that opportunity, and we're seeing huge growth in it. Some estimates are a 5x growth in 5 years of the retail media networks. And it can be B2B as well, but mostly well known in the retail space. I'm going to move on to one of the questions here. Maybe a quick one for Rick. Shekhar asked, what new avenues has Channel Advisor introduced post their acquisition with Commerce Hub?
That's a good question. Post acquisition is tough to say, because I think it just closed about a month or two ago, so they haven't had much time post acquisition to add a whole bunch. But I think, the big theory behind the acquisition for Commerce Hub and Channel Advisor, and what the company has released, is really how to provide more options for Channel Advisor sellers to sell into retailers, and how to add more supply to their big retail customers that have been traditionally with Commerce Hub. So I think that's really the ecosystem that Commerce Hub is trying to create here, that I think was not really available for each of those companies independently in the past.
Great. And actually, here's one for you, Marina. What marketplaces in Europe would you consider most notable? From Miles.
That's a good one. That's a good one. I think that all these companies that are starting to do some kind of circular economy and using platform marketplaces to do it. So I want to say like Vinted, Wallapop, Zalando, right? So they are starting to open in that sustainability area. So I would like to highlight these ones.
Right. And if people asking that question want to know more, I suggest a trip to beautiful Barcelona in May to attend the Network Summit, where a lot of them will be speaking.
Yes, thank you.
Justin asked a question here about what does everybody think about the future of vertical or niche marketplaces? Mark, I think you've written some about that.
Well, I mean, the thing is, there's many more to come, because it's not a mature, there's nothing mature about this. So there's going to be a lot of trial, a lot of error, and eventually the ones that are going to connect and scale to enterprise because they've figured out what the customer wants. That's how the economy works. And that's how e-commerce works. So yeah, right now, there's just a lot of trying going on. Like, for instance, there's 12 different marketplaces I count in the chemical industry. And guess what? They're not overlapping with one another. That industry is just so big. Every single one serves a distinct niche. So the thing is, the ones that are going to make it in the niche space, I don't think niche is a good word. They're going to know their customer, their product, how to deliver it better via marketplace model than anybody else. And that's what's going to basically separate, those who are going to be in the bin of history versus those who are going to have a great run and a great story to tell.
May I add something here? I like to put an example, like I'm investing in Optics, is a photonics marketplace. And I think it's super important because we need some kind of specialization, right? So in order to select the product, what they are doing is translate in an algorithm and using AI and trying to become the standard. So today, if you want to go and buy some laser, for example, it's going to be hard to compare peers with peers. So I think vertical marketplaces is going to standardize the language between these companies. And also I think they can start, and I would like to add the community behind that, right? All the Q&As, what is working for you, what is not. So I think it's super important also in the vertical marketplaces, the power of the community.
Well, I'll add an example of a vertical marketplace, nuts and bolts. You'd think, how simple is that? And who needs a marketplace for nuts and bolts? One of our clients, Bay Fasteners, built a marketplace with close to 500,000 SKUs or products, nuts and bolts and screws and rivets and stainless, all types of materials, aerospace or marine, all types of special applications. And if you need to go to you find this unique specialized fastener, or you need high volume or an RFQ process for a mix of them, why not go to a marketplace that specializes just in marketplaces? So I think especially in B2B, there's a lot of opportunity to kind of own. It may not necessarily be a winner takes all, but it may be a oligopoly of a few take all, kind of like in transport of, there's Uber and Lyft. There may not necessarily be only one, but definitely I think there's opportunity to win and dominate in some of those markets. I think we've got room for time for maybe one more question here. Maybe two, we'll see how long we go on this one. The question from Anthony is, any indications on GMV or growth of service marketplaces relative to product marketplaces?
I mean, look no closer. If you look at, the upheaval going on in logistics and freight management, just to name a few, yeah, I mean, there are services marketplaces that I didn't even know existed. And guess what? Every time I talk to Mike Brown, he's got a whole new slew of them. So yeah, services is probably the fastest growing part of all this. But that's rather general observation. But yeah, yeah, a lot of services stuff going on.
I'll chime in. I look at marketplaces and platform economy businesses as in three categories: marketplaces for physical goods, marketplaces for services, and marketplaces for digital assets. Marketplaces for physical goods, I think, are the most easily replicated and commoditized. I don't want to say commoditized, it's not a commodity, but you see lots of marketplaces for physical goods and lots of platforms like Miracle that I mentioned that can help you quickly launch a marketplace for physical goods. Marketplaces for services are a little bit more challenging because there's quality of service, delivery timeframes, ratings, multiple addresses, and so forth, other elements that make marketplaces for services more complex. But there are lots of very successful marketplaces for services, from Uber and Lyft for transportation, Airbnb or VRBO for lodging, Upwork and Fiverr for professional services, TaskRabbit for home services, all kinds of different services there. And in terms of, and those are very fast growing. Once you can solve the challenge of that industry or what you're providing there, like the logistics and safety of staying at a home or getting transportation from a stranger, you can definitely own that market or really disrupt the legacy, the what Airbnb did to the traditional hotel lodging, what Uber and Lyft did to traditional taxis and limo services. Huge disruption there. In the third category of marketplace for digital goods, that's where I think the opportunity for growth and the scalability and profit margin is the greatest. So if we look at Apple App Store or Google Play, those are marketplace for digital goods. So Apple does not produce any of the apps that are on the App Store. Yet, not last year, I think 2 years ago, they sold $80 billion of apps and in-app purchases. $80 billion. They make 30% on that. Sometimes 15%, but generally 30%. And now I don't know what the latest number is. I'm sure it's well over 100 billion that Apple makes on their App Store. And they're making 30% of near pure profit. You know, they don't pay anything to make those apps that are on the App Store. And that's why you saw the big, battle of Epic Games and Fortnite. They were selling about $1 billion of Fortnite on the app stores. And they didn't want to pay 30% of that $300 million to Apple and Google. That's why the big fight came up, and debate is still happening. And there's a question: are marketplaces too powerful? That's certainly a topic for discussion, and the monopoly debates come into play there. But back to the core question of marketplace for products, marketplace for services, marketplaces for digital assets. I think in that order, they are more scalable and more profitable, but also more challenging to launch and maintain and to own that niche. But what is really powerful is the combination of all three. I mentioned Instacart, and I think in the chat, somebody said that DoorDash is also a four-sided marketplace. So like Instacart, I said, they combine products from the grocers, they provide services from the personal shoppers and delivery people, and they provide data from the purchases back to this. They sell that back to the CPG brands and leverage it for their retail media network. So combining those three assets, physical, service, and data, is powerful. Or on Amazon, you can buy a TV from a third-party seller. You can have a third party install it in your home, and you can watch a movie on Amazon Prime from a third-party digital content provider. So combining those three business models, I think, is what's most powerful. I think we're out of time here. Any comments anybody would like to say in closing before we wrap up here?
Yeah, just I got to tell you, the thought that went into this and these 50 marketplace leaders across these categories, Tom, that was needed, and thank you as the service industry for doing that.
Well, it's Tom Gatos, our CMO, who really ran all that. So I'd like to thank him and recognize him and his marketing team, and everybody who contributed to this. So thank you, Mark. And Rick, Marina, any last words before we close?
Okay, I will go. And I think that technology, we have to think about blockchain and NFTs in order to revolution, the next evolution for the marketplaces. So pay attention to that, because we can manage with NFT, dynamic NFTs to contributors and so on. So let's think about next webinar. I think we have to talk about that.
Yeah, definitely. The digital assets marketplaces are really critical. Next step, Rick.
Yeah, I think the most exciting things that I see are really all the emerging categories that have not been digitized. And Mark really pointed out the consumer, meaning the buyer convenience, as the main factor in driving that. And so there are a lot of industries that have been around, for dozens of years that have simply not been digitized, and there are still purchase orders being placed all over the world with fax and email. And those are ripe for marketplace type of disruption.
Definitely. Whenever there's inefficiency, the marketplace business model can really transform that industry and disrupt the legacy incumbents that depend upon that inefficiency. Great point, Rick. Well, also wanted to add that Mark, I think DC 360 is soon to publish a report on the marketplaces that McFadyen's honored to sponsor. And you want to say a word or two about that?
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, last year we had 300 or 400, I'm losing track here. We'll have at least 500 next year, and basically we intend to chart the growth and analyze the trends that's going to drive this whole forward. So we're going to tell folks why it matters and why it's mainstream, so stand by for more. Thank you.
Yep, look forward to that report, everybody. Well, I'd like to definitely thank these thought leaders for joining me today, and please follow them on LinkedIn and their other outlets of wisdom. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Rick. Thank Marina. Have a
Thank you
great day,
too.
everybody.
Guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.